Well, this is about a film I'm producing or hope to produce called I Adore My 64. So first thing I'll do is show you a concept trailer that I did. Want to hit the lights?
Actually, I'm going to hit the lights on because
Okay.
that screen gets messed up on the webcam because of that
Alright.
reflection.
All right, no problem.
Now, we'll-
Alexa, what is the best-selling computer in all of history?
Believe it or not, the $595 Commodore 64 is the best-selling computer system of all time, with sales of about 17 million systems.
Very dramatic.
Nicely done.
Thanks for letting me be here and to talk about the film. I'm really honored to be given the opportunity to speak about my personal Commodore story and the film I'm developing called I Adore My 64. My name is Jeff Schaap and I'm from Orlando, Florida. I'm a career filmmaker, but more importantly, like most of you, I'm also a lifelong Commodore user. When I stop and look back at my life, my Commodore has had quite an impact on it, and particularly the 64. And of course, I've come to know many people could say the same. Like a lot of you, I have a Commodore t-shirt I wear around sometimes, and often when I'm out, people say to me, I remember having a Commodore 64, or my buddy and I have one, we used to play it all the time. It doesn't matter where I am, people of a certain vintage always seem to have treasured memories of their experiences and interaction with it. And my own Commodore story has an unconventional beginning that I like to tell. When I was 10, my family and I went on a vacation to Florida, and all 7 of us packed into a conversion van and drove down from Michigan to spend a couple weeks there. And we even managed not to murder each other on the 22-hour road trips each way. But when we got back, we found that our home had been flooded by a huge snowstorm. There had been a huge snowstorm and our house had gotten flooded, and it got so cold that a water pipe in our basement burst, and it filled up the basement with water, put the furnace out, and then the rest of the house flooded. And this was all just before the Christmas of 1983. Now that's stressful enough, but later I found out that my parents had bought us a computer and had been hiding it in the basement till Christmas. Now there's an ongoing debate about what that computer was. My mom told me it was for sure a Commodore, but because they had received insurance money to replace it, they decided to buy the one that was a little bit better. So my best guess is that I almost got a VIC-20 for Christmas, but I ended up with a Commodore 64. And I was elated. I took to it like a fish to water. I only had the bread bin itself at first, and I started out by playing games, as most everyone did. And I didn't even have a cassette drive, and definitely not the expensive 41 disc drive. So I played cartridges, and my very first cartridge was the Grid Runner by Jeff Minter. But like a lot of you, I'm sure I also began to explore BASIC and typing in my own programs. So I became sort of enamored with the idea that, oh, maybe I could create my own games. And before too long, I did get a cassette drive, and that opened up a whole new world of access to games. A few years later, after a lot of begging and pleading, I got a 1541 disc drive for my birthday. And sadly, this is the only picture that I have of my interaction with my Commodore 64, the computer that was such a big part of my life growing up. And that's me there on the right and my dad on the left, and then you can see the 1541 just barely sitting there on the table. The 1541, of course, opened up another set of doors, and just like a lot of people, I began trading great games with people, and other people who had 64s, other friends. And I spent hours upon hours playing Bruce Lee and Beachhead and Karateka, Maniac Mansion, Impossible Mission. My brother and I played Racing Destruction Set all the time, so maybe you might remember that one. Whoops. And a lot of Infocom games. I had a buddy who was really into that, and we I don't think we ever solved any of them, but we enjoyed playing them. But it wasn't enough, and I continued to have a serious yearning to want to create games myself. I quickly realized that trying to program things in BASIC wasn't ever going to get me there. But the 12-year-old me just couldn't understand how people who were making these games could get the 64 to do things that seemed like wizardry. I was perplexed, and I felt like I was locked out of some special club. My school had about 20 Commodore 64s, and it was fun wowing my friends and teachers with what I could do in BASIC. But the question would inevitably come, you're so good at this, why don't you make a game? And I did try. Somehow I figured out there was something called machine language, and it was probably something I read in Run magazine that I was subscribed to at the time. I went into my local library and I actually did find a book about programming for in machine language, but and honestly, after one chapter I knew that I was in over my head. I just didn't have the information and software or tools and guidance I needed to really understand the process. And honestly, I was not as smart as many other veritable geniuses out there who were able to figure it out and with the resources that were available at the time. And sort of as a last-ditch effort, I got a copy of Gary Kitchen's Game Maker, and I had some modest success with that. But I was still frustrated by its limitations, or my limitations really, and the fact that it was still very slow when compared to games that I enjoyed playing. And despite my game design aspirations never really taking off, I still immensely enjoyed my 64. I continued to ask for new games for it. I got a 300 baud modem because I didn't know about the existence of BBSs back then, I only used it to call my buddy in the next town. So we would just chat back and forth over the terminal. I'm sure some of you did that. And you know, my sister would walk in and say, "That's dumb. Why don't you just call him on the phone?" You know, but genius isn't always recognized in its age. She's probably texting somebody right now on her phone. On her phone. So anyway, I got a printer and a Kovacs Voice Master, and I really had a lot of amazing experiences with my 64, and it was so much more than just playing games. But then one winter day it happened. I was walking across my room in my socks, and I inadvertently touched one of the joystick ports as I was going to turn on my 64, and I felt a little poke, but I didn't think much of it. But as I'm sure you can all guess, the outcome of that sad event. That little bit of static set electricity into the PCB, and it blew up one or more of the chips inside, and I powered it on, and I got the dreaded black screen of death. My mom and I took it to a Commodore authorized repair center, and the owner spent about 5 minutes looking at it, said, "No, it can't be fixed," and offered me $25 for it. That really could have been the end of my Commodore story, but it wasn't. Some weeks later, my mom and I were in a local store, and there on the shelf was something I'd never seen before, and it was a new Commodore computer that looked sleek and modern and came with a new operating system called GEOS. Best of all, it was on clearance for $150. So my mom, who knew how much I loved and missed my 64, bought it for me on the spot, which is pretty surprising. That kicked off several more happy years with my 64C, and I'm proud to say I still have this one today, and it still works, and it's still all original parts. But eventually, like many others, I succumbed to the rise of the PC. Before I headed to college, my dad got the dual floppy IBM PC at home for its insurance business that cost him a small fortune. And while I could see the utility of it for office work, the monochrome graphics and the internal one-voice speaker just seemed so underwhelming when you compared it to my 64's graphics and sound ability. I felt like the general populace just didn't understand how much better a computer could be. How could people be so bamboozled? But you can't fight the tide, and as time went on, I began using a PC myself and dragged one off to college. And once again, that might have been where my Commodore story ended, but it wasn't. I became a communications major in college, and my passion for film and video was ignited. the small college I attended had a video editing studio with a Commodore computer called an Amiga, and it had this wondrous add-on board called the video toaster. My love for all things Commodore was reborn, and I spent countless hours editing on that system and began to delve real heavily also into Lightwave 3D, which is a 3D program. So again, my Commodore had a huge impact on my life's direction as I prepared for what would become my future career. And yet again, that could have been the end of my Commodore story, but again, it wasn't. After college, I got my first job as a video production specialist at a nonprofit back in Michigan. And guess what they had for an editing system? A video toaster running on an Amiga 2000. I produced a lot of different videos on that system as well, and to my best recollection, I was probably using it till sometime around the year 2000 when we finally switched over to Premiere 2.0 running on a PC. And finally, that was the end of my interaction with Commodore computers. Or was it? Fast forward to about 2017. Like many people in midlife, I began to pine for some of the nostalgic experiences I had as a kid. And of course, my Commodore 64 was the central part of that. My parents were cleaning out their basement and found my old 64C still in its original box. I took it back to my home in Orlando and I powered it on. And yes, I know how stupid and risky that was now. I didn't know back then. But thankfully, it fired right up and it didn't blow up. And that one event reignited my interest in the 64. It started really innocently, as most obsessions do. And I told my wife, I was just going to find one on eBay, and I thought I would buy one that needed some cosmetic attention, fix it up, and resell it. And once I had done that a couple times and built up a little cash, I would find one that I wanted to purchase, restore, and keep. And that would be it. And that was the plan. And this is today. Here's the pad. Yeah. Even some Amiga stuff. And that's the C64 Maxi. Yeah, I keep telling my wife, hey, it could be worse. It's not like I'm collecting tools or expensive watches or cars or classic cars or something. And she just shakes her head and laughs. As I began to buy and restore and resell old 64s and associated hardware, I began to build up a bit of cash. Now, I definitely wasn't making money, if accounting for time. I spent hours and hours meticulously restoring them, and there's no way the small profit I made by selling them was making up for that. But it was a fun hobby. I was really gratified knowing that I was helping to breathe new life into these forgotten, discarded treasures and getting them into the hands of people who likely had grown up with one and helping them relive their best memories of it. So I would use the little money I had to buy other Commodore 64s to repair and other Commodore machines that I had little or no experience with. I ended up with some VIC-20s, a Commodore 16, some Plus 4s, an SX64, a PET 2001, and even an Amiga 500 and 1200. It's a lot of fun getting experience and explore these machines because I'd missed out on them in their heyday. And another unexpected thing happened along the way. Now, I could have guessed that there were some people out there who were still into Commodore computers today, but never did I imagine the scale of the worldwide community that is so passionately dedicated to keeping them alive and continuing to do development for them. I was astounded to see all the hardware and software developments that had taken place. People who had created modern mass storage devices, like the SDIC, Pi 1541, and modern networking solutions like the C64 NIC and Wi-Fi modems, to the totally reimagined modern-day 64s, such as the Ultimate 64, and even the C64C, Maxi, and Mini. And I was shocked to find that there are people still running BBSs, and most of all, people are still creating brand new games all the time, some of which surpass anything that was available for the machines back in the day. It was such a delight to find that community that I'm sure existed back then, and to see that it's still alive and well and is united by the interconnection that the modern day internet affords us. So long ago, I had to let go of my childhood aspirations of designing a video game for the 64 and contributing to the community in that way. That wasn't a mountain I was ever able to climb. However, my life's path has included spending over 20 years as a film producer and editor, and I've been given the chance to see places and tell stories that I never could have imagined. And I'm extremely grateful to God for all the opportunities that I've had. I've shot and produced a lot of short films around the world, and 2 that are over 40 minutes, so I have quite a bit of experience carrying film projects end to end. It would seem rather obvious looking back on it now, but it took me a while to finally realize how my particular experience and skills could contribute to the Commodore community that exists today. But eventually, it dawned on me that creating a film that highlights and celebrates and honors that community is something that I'm uniquely positioned to do. The question could be fairly asked, do we need another Commodore documentary? There's a lot of them out there of varying scale and quality, and that's an admission I have to make. Many YouTubers have created various history of Commodore videos or video series, and there are other full-blown documentaries that have focused in part or entirely on the rise and fall of Commodore as a company. But I've come to realize that there's not really anything specific about the community as it exists today. Its enduring legacy is a testament to the impact that the Commodores had on people, and that's what really drove my idea for the film that eventually came to be called I Adore My 64. I spent a few years just getting to know the community that's out there and understanding who some of the major figures are, and at least another year thinking, preparing, and planning for the film. But finally, in November of 2021, we had our first production shoot. A good friend of mine who acted as my second camera and a drone pilot and I traveled to Dallas to interview 2 guys that I'm betting the majority of you would probably know. And if you're not familiar, on the left is the very popular retro YouTuber David Murray. He's had quite a history with Commodore machines, including the 64, and has created quite a bit of content about them on his channel, The 8-Bit Guy. On the right is Bo Zimmerman, who has an incredible wealth of knowledge on all things Commodore. He maintains an amazing website with an enormous amount of resources and information, and has an incredibly huge collection of Commodore computers himself, some of which are very rare. We had a great time with both of them. They were very gracious and gave us really in-depth interviews. Just recently, we were able to shoot with our third interviewee, Anthony Becker. He's probably better known as the second half of the Guru Meditation, an Amiga-focused YouTube channel that he and Bill Winters, aka Amiga Bill, have run for years. Anthony was also really gracious, and we had a great time hearing about his Commodore story and seeing some of the rare and unusual Commodore's items he has in his collection. So, what's next? Well, the plan is to take the 3 interviews we've shot so far, along with footage from this year's World of Commodore event, and spin up a short preview of what the film will be like. I have pretty solid drafts of Bo and David's preview portions at this point, and I'm moving forward in developing the rest. Once this preview is done, the plan is to create a Kickstarter campaign to fund the rest of the production of the film. Up to this point, I Adore My 64 has been an entirely self-funded passion project. While it's not been exorbitant in cost, it has been financially significant for me, and I realize I won't be able to finish the film that way. When I began working on the film, I had the benefit of access to some high-end cameras, equipment, and an editing system through my job. However, following the shooting of the first 2 interviews, I was unexpectedly laid off, and my ability to use that equipment rode off into the veritable sunset with it. So to move forward, I really need the help and support of the existing Commodore community and those who still have a special place in their heart for the 64. These funds will not only cover travel costs, but also some of the essential equipment needed to finish the film. So let me outline a few other aspects about the film. As already mentioned, I Adore My 64 will focus specifically on the Commodore 64 and the community that surrounds it today. I feel like I need to limit the film's focus so that it remains attainable. Realistically, a film could be made about each and every individual computer or computer series that Commodore has produced. But trying to do it all will likely mean not doing any of it well. So because of my personal history and experience with it, the film will focus specifically on the 64. This will not be a Commodore history film. I think that ground has already been tread. Many videos, documentaries, and individual interviews already exist about the history, and they're out there if you want to see them. Some broad strokes about the history of the 64 will be included for the uninitiated, but it won't be a focus. And the film will likely be 45 to 75 minutes long. I think that's pretty optimal length, and it keeps it within my reach. I've produced other films of this length, so I feel like I have a realistic picture of the enormous amount of time and effort that will need to go into producing it. and this might be disappointing for some, it definitely is for me, but iDoor My 64 will be focused entirely on the scene in North America, and that is due in no small part to budget constraints. I know the 64 has an impact all over the world, from UK to Germany to even South America and everywhere in between. But again, to keep the effort reasonable and attainable, I have to limit the scope. Who knows, if it's a runaway success, then maybe there'll be an iDoor My 64 to the international edition. And the other specific is the film will be as high quality as I can reasonably attain. I'm not shooting this on Red Cinema cameras for sure, but I'm also not using a cell phone either. So this is definitely not a Marvel movie, but my goal is for it to be a cut above many of the things you might see on YouTube. And it's going to take time to finish the film. It would be great if I could make the film my full-time job, but that's not a reality. However, I'm going to commit to giving regular updates on my website and social media so that supporters can be informed about exactly where the film is in its progress. So, how can you be a part of it? Well, number one, join the Facebook group at facebook.com/iDoorMy64 so you can stay current with the production, and you can see updates on the film's website at iDoorMy64film.com. And I would greatly appreciate any promotion you can give the film within any of the Commodore-related groups you are part of, in person or online. There are a number of great Facebook groups and online forums, but there are also groups like TPUG here in Canada and around the world. So please feel free to share about it in the groups of which you're a part. And when it launches, I'd appreciate all the help I can get to spread the word about the Kickstarter campaign so the film has its best chance of getting funded. And last, I'd love to hear from you or anyone who's interested in the film, especially if you have ideas on people you'd like to see interviewed. And you can reach me at iDoorMy64film@gmail.com. And I want to thank TPUG for throwing the doors wide open to me and allowing me to shoot here at World of Commodore and asking me to speak about the film. I'm truly honored to be able to do that. If anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them. And right after I show just two preview clips from David Murray and Bo Zimmerman.
Oh my goodness, have I seen a resurgence of interest in old 8-bit computers. I would guess around 2010 is when the first seeds of it started to pop up and be seen. You do have a couple of weirdos like me that never really stopped using the 8-bits. There was no point at which I have not had a Commodore computer hooked up since the early 80s. I was born in 1971. As a kid, I used to like to take electronic things apart and try and figure out how they work. This was actually a doable thing in the late 70s. The little middle school that I went to had a computer lab, and it was full of Commodore 4032 PETs. And I was absolutely amazed from the first moment that I saw them, especially when one of the other kids who was a little more in the know, he would hit the stop key to stop one of the games we were playing and show that you could actually list the code from these games and change it. And that was a revelation. And I knew from that moment I had to have one of these Commodore computers. And I thought pets were within reach, but quickly discovered that they were not. But my grandmother had gotten a Commodore 64 to keep the books for the restaurant that they owned. And when I found out that there was actually a Commodore computer that real people could have in their homes, I began a begging process that resulted in getting a Commodore 64 not long after. For me, what was special about the Commodore 64, and the reason I wanted to get it so badly, was because it was a Commodore PET that I could have in my home. I did not realize until later that I was getting an advanced arcade machine. That was just bonus.
Soundstripe.
my name is David Murray, and I'm right here from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. What do I do for a living? I make YouTube videos about old computers. I was just making videos as a hobby. I kind of ran out of topics to talk about, so eventually I started doing like 8-bit related stuff, and people seem to really like it. I've made a number of games for the Commodore 64 over the years. Big releases of that, of course, is Planet X2, and then Pesky Robots. My first encounter with an actual computer, I was like 6 years old, and that's when my brother decided that he wanted a computer, and my parents took us to the store, and we bought a Commodore VIC-20. I don't think I'd ever even seen a computer at that time, at least not that I remember. And I still remember bringing that computer home from the store and setting it up and just being totally mesmerized by, you know, an interactive piece of equipment with a keyboard on it, even though I didn't know how to type and I didn't know what I was going to do on it. We had some games for a VIC-20. You know, we had Omega Rays and some things like that. But when we saw my friend's Commodore 64, we were just like blown away. Like the music so much better, the graphics were so much better, and he had a disk drive as well, which we didn't have. So yeah, I think after some begging, I think we got our parents to upgrade us to a Commodore 64, and we started meeting more people at school who also had Commodore 64s, and then we were able to, you know, share software and things like that with them. If you look at 1982 and you look at all the competition out there, to be honest, there weren't really many computers that could compete with the C64 in terms of graphics and sound. You did have the Atari systems that could come pretty close, but other than that, I mean, they were way ahead of, you know, Apple or Sinclair or any of them out there. And at the same time, as being better in all these regards, they were actually pretty affordable. So there were a number of iterations of the Commodore 64, but a lot of people don't know it actually started as the Commodore Max. A lot of people have never seen one of these. These are extremely rare, but this is actually, you could call it the original Commodore 64. It's just got a membrane keyboard. It was really designed to be more of a game console, and it has the same sound chip, video chip, and most of the same architecture as the Commodore 64, but it is missing the RAM. It only has like 2K of RAM. This was discontinued almost as soon as it hit the market, and then they decided to make the C64 as we know it. But yeah, that's where it started.
Hey, that's it. So thanks for coming in and listening, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them for you. Yes, sir.
Did you sell your original 64 for $25?
Yes. Well, my mom made me do it. I regret that so much now. Even if it didn't work, I wish I would have kept it. Like, knowing what I know now about repairing it, like, for sure that guy kind of bamboozled us. Yeah. But, yeah.
Did he use it's the motherboard line?
He told me, I think I was pretty young at the time, but he was telling me, it's in this modulator, which I assume he meant the RF modulator. He's like, see, it's buried in epoxy. You can't get to anything in there. I'm like, the likelihood, now thinking back on it, the likelihood that was the problem is almost zero. You know, so you live and learn, right? But like I said, I just still have my C64C, and I keep it safe. I don't touch the joystick port, for sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
Are you gonna edit on the Amiga?
Oh, that would be so great. I wish that were possible. One of the things I didn't talk about was how, New Tech, the company that developed the video toaster, went on to develop the Flyer. And while I was still at school, they were looking at that as a replacement. But they were really nervous about Commodore's future and just decided not to invest in it, which of course was a wise decision. But yeah, I wish I could, actually. Still a lot of fun. Anything else? All right. I'd love to give you a card if you didn't get one about the film. So yeah, swing up here and I'll get you one. Thank you for coming.